Sometimes the people who change your life don't knock on your door. Sometimes they show up crying outside it. The hallway lights on the 4th floor flickered every few seconds, washing the narrow corridor in pale yellow light and then shadow again. It was nearly 11 o'clock on a cold October night in Queens, and Charlotte Hayes was thinking about nothing except sleep. Her shoulders ached from a 10-hour shift at the pediatric speech clinic. The strap of her worn leather bag dug into her shoulder as she stepped out of the elevator and walked toward apartment 4C. The building was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that settled over old apartment buildings after most of the city had gone to bed. Charlotte reached into her pocket for her keys. Then she heard it, a small sound, soft, broken, almost lost beneath the distant hum of traffic outside. A child crying. She stopped. The sound came again. Charlotte slowly looked down the hallway. At first she saw nothing except the flickering lights and faded beige walls. Then another flash of light revealed a small figure sitting against the wall beside her apartment door. A little boy, maybe 7 years old. His knees were pulled tightly against his chest. His face was buried in his arms. His dark hoodie looked too thin for the chilly weather. Outside. Charlotte frowned. She glanced toward the stairwell, then toward the elevator. No adults, no neighbors, nobody searching for him. The boy didn't seem to notice her standing there. His shoulders shook slightly as he tried and failed to stop crying. Charlotte set her bag down quietly. "Hey there." Her voice was gentle. The boy flinched, not dramatically, just enough to reveal how startled he was. He slowly raised his head. Green eyes looked back at her through tears. Charlotte felt something tighten in her chest. He looked exhausted, not physically hurt, just tired in a way children weren't supposed to be. "Are you okay?" she asked. The boy stared at her without answering. The hallway light flickered again. For a moment she thought he might run. Instead he looked toward her apartment door, then back at her, as if he had been waiting there. "What's your name?" Charlotte asked. Silence. She crouched a few feet away, careful not to move closer. Years working with children had taught her patience. The boy's fingers tightened around the sleeve of his hoodie. Finally, barely above a whisper, he spoke. "Ethan." Charlotte offered a small smile. "I'm Charlotte." Ethan nodded once, then looked away. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just fragile. Charlotte noticed his sneakers, expensive, much more expensive than anything most kids in this neighborhood wore. His hoodie looked simple at first glance, but the stitching and material told a different story. Somebody cared enough to buy him quality things, which made his presence here even stranger. "Do your parents know where you are?" she asked softly. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The sadness remained, but something else flashed underneath it. Fear. Not panic, not terror. Just the look of someone who desperately didn't want to answer a question Charlotte didn't push. "Are you hungry?" she asked instead. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. 20 minutes later, Ethan sat at her small kitchen table with a bowl of chicken noodle soup. Steam rose toward the ceiling. Outside the apartment windows, rain tapped softly against the glass. Charlotte sat across from him, pretending not to watch how quickly he ate. The apartment felt warmer somehow, less empty. Ethan hadn't said much since coming inside, just enough to answer simple questions. No last name, no phone number, no address. Every time Charlotte asked where his family was, he went quiet. The answer clearly mattered, and he clearly didn't want to give it. What she didn't know was that less than 3 miles away, half a dozen black SUVs were moving through the city streets. Men with earpieces searched subway stations, parks, bus stops, and neighborhoods across Queens. Phone lines lit up, security cameras were checked. Streets were swept block by block, because somewhere in New York City a man was looking for his son, and he was running out of patience. Back in the apartment, Ethan finished the last spoonful of soup. For the first time all evening, some color returned to his face. Charlotte handed him a glass of water. "Feeling better?" she asked. Ethan nodded. Then his eyes drifted toward a framed photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. Charlotte and her foster mother. "Taken years ago. Is that your mom?" he asked quietly. Charlotte followed his gaze. A small smile touched her face. She was. Ethan stared at the picture longer than expected, then lowered his eyes. Something about the question felt heavier than it should have. Before Charlotte could ask why, a sound echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp knocks, not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. Ethan froze, the color drained from his face. Charlotte immediately noticed. The little boy's grip tightened around the edge of the chair. His breathing changed. Slow, careful, like he already knew who was standing outside. Then came another knock, this time slightly firmer. And for the first time that night, genuine fear appeared in Ethan's eyes. Charlotte slowly stood from the table while Ethan remained frozen in his chair. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, quieter. The soft rain against the windows seemed louder now. Another knock echoed through the room, calm, patient. Whoever stood outside was not trying to force their way in, they were waiting. Charlotte glanced toward the boy. "Do you know who that is?" she asked gently. Ethan lowered his eyes. His silence was answer enough. Charlotte walked toward the front door. Every instinct told her to be careful. She was alone. It was almost midnight. There was a child in her apartment whose last name she still did not know. The hallway beyond the door felt 1,000 miles away. She stopped beside the peephole and looked through it. For a moment she forgot to breathe. A tall man stood beneath the flickering hallway light. Dark hair, dark overcoat, broad shoulders. Behind him stood 2 other men several feet away, both dressed in black suits. They were not speaking. They were simply watching the hallway with quiet focus. The man closest to the door did not look angry. He looked exhausted. Charlotte opened the security latch but kept the door mostly closed. "Can I help you?" she asked through the narrow opening. The man's eyes immediately found hers. Sharp green eyes, the same shade she had seen sitting at a kitchen table. Relief flashed across his face so quickly she almost missed it. "I believe my son is inside." His voice was calm and controlled, deep without being intimidating. Charlotte looked back toward Ethan. "Your son?" she asked. The man nodded once. "Ethan Romano." The moment the name left his mouth, Charlotte saw Ethan close his eyes, not with fear, with resignation. Like a secret he had been carrying all evening had finally caught up to him. Charlotte opened the door slightly wider. "How do I know you are really his father?" she asked. The question did not seem to offend him. If anything, he appeared grateful she had asked. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and removed his wallet. Inside was a photograph. Ethan stood beside him at what looked like a baseball game, both smiling, both wearing matching caps. The resemblance was undeniable. Charlotte studied the photo for a second before looking up again. One moment she stepped away from the door and crossed the apartment. Ethan still sat at the table. His bowl was empty. His hands rested in his lap. "Is that your dad?" Charlotte asked softly. Ethan nodded. Will he be mad? The question surprised her. Why would he be mad? Ethan shrugged. His voice was barely audible. "Because I left." Charlotte knelt beside him. "Your father has been looking for you all night." Ethan swallowed hard. The little boy seemed older than 7 in that moment, older and much sadder. Charlotte stood and returned to the door. This time she opened it completely. The man remained exactly where he had been. "You can come in," she said. He hesitated. His eyes briefly scanned the apartment beyond her shoulder. Then he stepped inside. The 2 men behind him stayed in the hallway. The door closed. For a second nobody spoke. The apartment felt suspended in time. Then Ethan slowly slid off his chair. Father and son looked at each other across the small kitchen. Neither moved immediately. Charlotte expected anger, questions, maybe even a lecture. Instead, the man's shoulders seemed to loosen. A weight he had been carrying all night finally lifting. "There you are," he said quietly. Ethan stared at the floor. "Sorry." The man crossed the room, not quickly, not dramatically. When he reached his son, he simply rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Do not do that again." His voice remained calm. But Charlotte could hear something underneath it. Fear, the kind that only appeared after danger had passed. Ethan nodded. The room fell silent again. Then the man turned toward Charlotte. "Thank you." 2 simple words, yet they sounded completely sincere. Most people would have called the police. Charlotte folded her arms. "Most children do not show up crying outside my apartment." For the first time, something resembling a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It disappeared almost immediately. "I am Gabriel Romano." Charlotte finally had a name to match the face. She expected the introduction to mean nothing. Instead, something shifted in the atmosphere. One of the men waiting outside briefly opened the apartment door and whispered something toward Gabriel. Charlotte caught only fragments. "Security vehicle confirmed." Gabriel gave a short nod. The man disappeared again. Charlotte looked back at him. Whatever business surrounded this family was clearly larger than she had imagined. Much larger. Unfortunately for her, this strange night was not ending. It was only beginning. Because as Gabriel prepared to leave with his son, his eyes landed on something sitting beside Charlotte's bookshelf, a small silver music box. And for the first time since entering the apartment, genuine surprise appeared on his face. The surprise vanished from Gabriel's face almost as quickly as it appeared, but Charlotte noticed it. The silver music box sat quietly on the bookshelf beneath a lamp, its polished surface reflecting the warm light of the apartment. For a second, Gabriel looked as though he wanted to ask a question. Instead, he simply nodded toward it. "That is an unusual piece." Charlotte glanced at the music box. "It belonged to my foster mother." Gabriel studied it one moment longer before looking away. Whatever had caught his attention remained unspoken. Ethan shifted beside him, and the moment passed. A few minutes later, the apartment door opened again. Cool night air drifted into the room. Ethan paused before leaving. His small hand tightened around the strap of his backpack. Then he looked back at Charlotte. "Thank you for the soup." Charlotte smiled. "You are welcome." Ethan hesitated. "And for not calling the police." A faint smile appeared on Charlotte's face. "Get some sleep, Ethan." The boy nodded. Then he disappeared into the hallway beside his father. Charlotte closed the door and leaned against it. The apartment felt strangely empty again. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows. She told herself the night was over. Unfortunately for her, it was not. The next morning, Charlotte arrived at her clinic 20 minutes early. The October air carried the smell of rain-soaked pavement and coffee from the corner cafe. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The waiting room sat quiet beneath soft fluorescent lights. Everything felt normal again, until she noticed the envelope. It rested neatly on her reception desk. Thick cream-colored paper, no stamp, just her name written across the front. Charlotte frowned. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for helping my son." Underneath the message was a card embossed with a single name, Gabriel Romano. No phone number, no title, nothing else. Charlotte stared at it for several seconds. Then she slipped the card into a drawer and started her day. By late afternoon, she had almost forgotten about it. Then Ethan appeared again, not physically, through conversation. One of her young patients mentioned a private academy on the Upper East Side. The same academy Charlotte remembered Ethan mentioning during their brief conversation over soup. The memory lingered longer than it should have. So did the image of the exhausted man standing outside her apartment door. 3 days later, the clinic phone rang shortly before closing. Charlotte almost ignored it. Almost. Familiar voice answered. Calm, controlled, instantly recognizable. "This is Gabriel Romano." Charlotte sat up straighter. "Is Ethan okay?" The question came out before she could stop herself. There was a brief silence on the other end. "He is fine." Something about the answer sounded genuine, as if he appreciated her concern. "Then why are you calling?" Charlotte asked. Rain tapped softly against the clinic windows. Outside, traffic crawled through evening congestion. "Ethan would like to see you again." Charlotte blinked. "What? You helped him during a difficult night." Gabriel paused. "He has not stopped talking about you." The statement surprised her. Ethan had barely spoken at all. "I am not sure that is a good idea." "Neither am I," Gabriel admitted. That answer surprised her even more. Another pause settled between them, but Ethan asked. Charlotte looked around the empty clinic. Something about the conversation felt unusual, not because of who Gabriel was, because of how carefully he chose every word. "And what exactly would this visit involve?" she asked. "Dinner." Charlotte laughed softly before she could stop herself. "You make that sound like a business meeting." For the first time she heard the faintest trace of amusement in his voice. "Most of my meetings are significantly less pleasant." An hour later, Charlotte found herself staring through the window of a black SUV as it crossed a set of wrought iron gates overlooking a massive estate outside the city. Trees lined the private road. Golden leaves drifted across the pavement beneath fading evening light. The house beyond looked less like a home and more like something from an old American magazine. Elegant, quiet, impossibly large. Yet the first thing Charlotte noticed was not the mansion. It was the silence. No children playing, no laughter, no life, just stillness. As the vehicle rolled to a stop, she spotted Ethan standing near the front entrance. The boy's face brightened immediately. Then Charlotte noticed something else. Beside the front door stood a framed photograph of a smiling woman holding Ethan's hand. Fresh white flowers rested beneath it, and suddenly, without anyone saying a word, Charlotte understood exactly what was missing from this house. The photograph remained in Charlotte's mind throughout dinner. Even after she followed Ethan into a sunlit dining room large enough to fit her entire apartment twice over, even after staff quietly brought food to the table and disappeared again without lingering. Even after Ethan began talking more than he had during the entire night, she found him outside her door. The absence in the house felt louder than any conversation. The framed photograph stood in a nearby corner beside fresh flowers. The smiling woman had bright eyes and a warmth that seemed impossible to miss. Charlotte watched Ethan glance toward the picture several times during dinner. Each time he quickly looked away. Gabriel noticed it too. He noticed everything. Yet he never commented. The silence around the subject seemed carefully maintained, like an invisible wall no one crossed. As the evening continued, Charlotte began noticing other things. The mansion was beautiful, but it did not feel like a home. Not entirely. Every room looked perfect. Every surface seemed planned, yet there were very few signs of life. No scattered toys, no family photographs beyond a handful carefully displayed, no signs of chaos, no signs of joy. Ethan finished his meal and asked if Charlotte wanted to see his treehouse. The request caught Gabriel off guard. For a brief second, genuine surprise appeared in his expression. "You have a treehouse?" Charlotte asked. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Come on." Before Gabriel could object, Ethan was already leading her toward a set of glass doors overlooking the backyard. The property stretched farther than Charlotte expected. Acres of autumn trees glowed beneath the fading orange sky. At the far edge of the lawn stood a large treehouse built between two massive oak trees. It looked less like a child's hideout and more like a miniature cabin. Ethan climbed the wooden stairs with practiced ease. Charlotte followed more carefully. The structure swayed slightly beneath the evening breeze. Inside, the small room contained books, drawing supplies, blankets, and a telescope pointed toward the darkening sky. Ethan immediately relaxed. For the first time, he looked like a normal 7-year-old boy. "This is my favorite place," he said. Charlotte smiled. "I can see why." Ethan moved toward a shelf and pulled out a sketchbook. He flipped through pages filled with drawings, trees, birds, buildings, stars. Most were surprisingly detailed. Charlotte stopped on one page. It showed 3 stick figures standing together beneath a bright yellow sun. One figure was noticeably smaller than the others. "Who drew this?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "A long time ago." Before Charlotte could ask more, footsteps sounded below. Gabriel appeared at the base of the stairs. He did not come up. He simply stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, watching, not interrupting. The setting sun painted the lawn gold behind him. Charlotte suddenly understood why Ethan felt safer up here. It was one of the few places in the entire estate that felt imperfect, human, real. Later that evening, Charlotte prepared to leave. Ethan walked her to the front entrance. The house seemed quieter now. Shadows stretched across the marble floors. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a grandfather clock chimed softly. Ethan stopped near the photograph of his mother. This time he did not look away. "She liked music boxes," he said suddenly. Charlotte blinked. Then she remembered Gabriel's reaction to the silver music box in her apartment. "Really?" Ethan nodded. "She collected them." Charlotte glanced toward the photograph again. Another small piece of the puzzle. Another connection she did not yet understand. Before she could ask anything else, Gabriel appeared beside them. He offered to have a driver take her home. Charlotte politely declined. The subway was familiar, simpler. Gabriel did not argue. Instead, he walked her outside. Cool air swept across the driveway. The first stars appeared overhead. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Gabriel looked toward the dark trees surrounding the property. "Thank you for coming." Charlotte smiled lightly. "I think Ethan invited me more than you did." A faint smile touched his face. "That is probably true." The moment lingered longer than either expected. Then Charlotte noticed something. As they stood there talking, Ethan watched from the front window. Not smiling, not waving, simply watching, as if he was afraid that once she left, something important would disappear with her. Unfortunately for all of them, that fear was not as unreasonable as it seemed, because later that night, long after Charlotte returned to her apartment, Ethan woke from a nightmare and whispered 4 words into the darkness of his room. 4 words that nobody else was supposed to hear. "It was my fault." Charlotte could not stop thinking about Ethan during the following week. She told herself it was professional concern. Children often stayed on her mind after difficult cases, yet Ethan was not her patient. He was simply a boy she had found crying outside her apartment door. A boy who seemed to carry far more sadness than any 7-year-old should. The image followed her through crowded subway rides and long afternoons at the clinic. It followed her home at night. It followed her into silence. Then, on a grey Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. The caller identification displayed a number she did not recognize. Charlotte almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello?" she answered. "Miss Hayes?" The voice belonged to an older woman, warm, professional. "My name is Margaret. I work for the Romano family. Ethan was wondering if you might visit this weekend." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "Did Ethan ask you to call?" A quiet laugh came through the phone. 3 times today. By Saturday afternoon, Charlotte found herself driving through the estate gates once again. The sky hung low with silver clouds. Wind pushed golden leaves across the long driveway. The mansion looked less intimidating than before, perhaps because she knew who waited inside. Ethan met her at the front door before she even reached the steps. "You came." His excitement seemed genuine. Charlotte laughed softly. Most people do not come back. The answer landed harder than he probably intended. Charlotte followed him inside. This time he did not take her to the dining room or the treehouse. Instead, he led her upstairs. The second floor felt quieter, more personal. Family photographs lined portions of the hallway. Ethan stopped outside a bedroom door. "This is my room." Charlotte stepped inside. Unlike the rest of the house, the room actually looked lived in. Books sat stacked beside the bed. Sketchpads covered a desk near the window. A model rocket stood beside a shelf filled with astronomy magazines. The room felt like Ethan, curious, thoughtful, lonely. While Ethan searched for something to show her, Charlotte wandered toward the desk. Several drawings lay scattered across the surface. Most showed trees, stars, and landscapes. Then she noticed a pattern. Certain symbols appeared again and again. A small house, a woman holding a child's hand, a broken circle. The same three images repeated throughout multiple sketches, not dramatically, quietly, almost subconsciously. "You really like drawing this house," Charlotte observed. Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. Maybe. Charlotte did not push. Instead, she picked up another sketch. This one showed three figures standing together beneath a night sky. The smallest figure had been drawn darker than the others, pressed harder into the page, as though the pencil had lingered there. "Who is this?" she asked gently. Ethan looked away. Nobody. The answer arrived too quickly. Charlotte carefully set the drawing back down. Children often revealed things through art long before they could explain them with words. She knew that better than most. Before she could say anything else, Ethan hurried toward a small cabinet beside his bookshelf. "I want to show you something." He opened the drawer. Inside sat dozens of carefully organized items: baseball cards, ticket stubs, photographs, tiny treasures collected over years. Charlotte smiled as Ethan proudly explained each object. Then something caught her eye. Folded beneath several photographs rested a small piece of paper, torn, worn along the edges. Ethan noticed her looking and quickly shut the drawer. Too quickly. The room fell silent. Then Ethan forced a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Do you want to see the telescope?" Charlotte nodded, but she noticed the change, the sudden tension, the guarded expression. The hidden paper remained in her thoughts long after they moved on to other topics. Hours later, as evening settled over the estate, Charlotte prepared to leave. She found Gabriel standing alone in the library. Rain tapped softly against tall windows overlooking the dark lawn. Shelves filled with books stretched toward the ceiling. A lamp cast warm amber light across the room. Gabriel closed a file when she entered. "How was the visit?" he asked. "Good." Charlotte hesitated. Then she added, "Ethan seems happier today." Relief flickered across his face. Brief, almost invisible. "That matters more than you know." Charlotte studied him for a second. There was something exhausting about the way he carried himself. As if he had been trying to solve a problem for months and was getting nowhere. Before she could ask anything, a voice echoed down the hallway. Ethan, calling for her. Charlotte turned toward the door. Neither she nor Gabriel noticed the small folded paper slipping from Ethan's pocket at the far end of the corridor. A paper containing only 6 handwritten words. 6 words that would change everything. "It should have been me instead." Charlotte did not notice the folded paper on the hallway floor, neither did Gabriel. Ethan had already disappeared around the corner by the time it slipped from his pocket. The note remained there beneath the soft glow of a wall sconce, unnoticed and forgotten for the moment. The following week moved quietly, at least on the surface. Autumn settled deeper over New York. Trees along the sidewalks turned gold and amber. Cold air drifted through the city each morning. Charlotte buried herself in work. But Ethan remained somewhere in the back of her mind. Then on Tuesday afternoon, another unexpected call arrived. This time it was not Gabriel. It was Ethan himself. "Hi," he said softly when Charlotte answered. She smiled immediately. "Hi, Ethan." A brief silence followed. "Do you think trees get lonely?" Charlotte blinked. "That is a very specific question. I was just wondering." She looked out the clinic window toward a row of maple trees swaying in the wind. "Maybe sometimes, but they are usually surrounded by other trees. They just do not always realize it." Ethan seemed to consider that. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but something about it lingered after the call ended. The question did not sound random. It sounded personal. 3 days later, Charlotte received another invitation. This time it was not dinner. Ethan wanted to show her his favorite park. The park sat nearly 20 minutes from the estate beside a quiet lake surrounded by walking trails. The sky hung bright and clear above the water. Ducks drifted across the surface. Children played near a small wooden bridge. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Ethan fed birds. Charlotte laughed as one stubborn duck followed them halfway down the path. Even Gabriel seemed more relaxed than usual. He stayed several yards behind them, allowing Ethan space while still keeping a careful eye on him. Charlotte noticed the pattern immediately. Gabriel never seemed fully at ease. Even during peaceful moments, part of him remained alert, watching, measuring, protecting. Eventually they reached a small bench overlooking the lake. Ethan sat beside Charlotte while Gabriel stepped away to answer a phone call. Wind rustled through the trees overhead. Fallen leaves drifted across the water like tiny boats. Ethan stared at them for a long moment, then he spoke. "Do you ever wish you could change something?" Charlotte glanced at him. "Sometimes." Ethan lowered his gaze. "What if you made a mistake and it hurt someone?" The question tightened something in her chest. Everyone makes mistakes. Not like this. His voice had grown quieter. Charlotte waited. Years of working with children had taught her the value of silence. Sometimes people spoke more when nobody rushed them. Ethan picked at the sleeve of his steak. Before Charlotte could answer, a familiar melody drifted through the air, soft, delicate. Gabriel's phone had begun ringing several yards away. Ethan instantly froze. The color faded from his face. Charlotte recognized the tune immediately. It sounded like the melody from an old music box. The same kind his mother had collected, the same kind sitting on Charlotte's bookshelf. Gabriel answered the phone and walked farther away, but Ethan remained completely still, his eyes fixed on the ask gently. The boy swallowed hard. "That song," his voice barely carried above the wind. "My mom liked that song." Charlotte nodded. "Your father told me she collected music boxes." Ethan stared toward the water. "It was playing the last time I saw her." The words slipped out before he seemed to realize he had spoken them. Then silence returned. Heavy silence. Charlotte felt the significance immediately, even if she did not yet understand it. Ethan quickly stood. "Can we go now?" The sudden change surprised her. "Of course." Ethan started walking back toward the parking area. Faster than before, Charlotte followed. Several feet behind them, Gabriel ended his phone call and watched his son retreat down the path. Concern crossed his face. Unfortunately for him, he had not heard the conversation. He had not heard the trembling uncertainty in Ethan's voice. He had not heard the guilt hidden beneath every word. And as Charlotte walked beside the boy toward the waiting vehicle, she realized one thing with absolute certainty. Ethan was carrying a secret much heavier than anyone around him understood. The secret finally surfaced on a cold Monday evening beneath the dim stage lights of an empty school auditorium. Charlotte had agreed to attend one of Ethan's school events after he spent nearly a week asking if she would come. The performance had ended an hour earlier. Families had gone, were locking classrooms. Outside, the sky had already turned dark. Ethan sat alone in the third row, staring at the stage while Charlotte waited beside him. The enormous room felt strangely quiet now. Empty seats stretched into shadows. Dust floated through pale beams of light overhead. "You did not stay for the reception," Charlotte said gently. Ethan shrugged. "I did not want to." His voice sounded distant, tired. Charlotte studied him carefully. Ever since the day at the lake, something had changed. The questions, the guilt, the sadness hidden beneath ordinary conversations. It was all becoming impossible to ignore. "Ethan," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why did you run away that night?" The question hung between them. For several seconds, neither moved, neither spoke. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The sound echoed through the empty auditorium. Ethan lowered his eyes. "Because I did not want to stay there anymore." "Why?" Another long silence followed. Then Ethan whispered something so quietly Charlotte almost missed it. "Because everybody keeps pretending," Charlotte frowned. "Pretending about what?" Ethan's small hands tightened together. "That it was not my fault." The words hit her like a sudden gust of cold air. Charlotte felt her heart sink. There it was, the thing hiding underneath every drawing, every question, every sleepless night. "What was your fault?" she asked carefully. Ethan stared at the stage. His eyes shimmered beneath the dim lights. "My mum." Charlotte did not interrupt. She simply listened. Ethan swallowed hard. "The last day I saw her, we had an argument." His voice trembled. "I was angry because she missed my school project." Tears gathered in his eyes. "I told her I wished she would stop worrying about me all the time." Charlotte remained silent. Then she left. His breathing became uneven, and she never came back. The words seemed to drain every ounce of strength from him. "If I had not said that." His voice had not been mad. Charlotte immediately understood. Not the facts, not the details, but the wound. A 7-year-old child trying to carry an impossible burden. A child connecting two events that should never have belonged together. "Ethan," she said softly, "look at me." Slowly he did. Tears slipped down his cheeks. "That was not your fault." He shook his head immediately. "You do not know that. I know children say things when they are upset." Charlotte's voice remained calm. "I know parents understand that." "Ethan, not understand. Then help me understand." His shoulders trembled. "A few weeks after she died, I heard people talking." Charlotte listened carefully. "Who?" Ethan shrugged. "I do not remember. Maybe people at the house." He wiped his eyes. "They said everything happened because she was distracted." Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. "And you think she was distracted because of your argument?" Ethan nodded. "So if I never said those things—" His voice cracked again. The auditorium seemed impossibly quiet. Charlotte finally understood the true weight Ethan had been carrying. Not fear, not anger, guilt, crushing guilt, the kind no child should ever carry alone. What Ethan did not know was that, less than 10 minutes earlier, Gabriel had arrived at the school after finishing a meeting across town. He had entered through a side hallway and stopped when he heard voices coming from the auditorium. He had not intended to listen, but then he heard Ethan's words and froze. Standing unseen beyond the doorway, Gabriel listened as his son revealed a pain he never knew existed. Back inside the auditorium, Charlotte moved closer and gently placed a hand over Ethan's trembling fingers. "Your mother loved you." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. "I know, then she would never want you carrying this." Tears slipped freely down his face now. "I cannot stop thinking about it." Charlotte's heart broke for him, because for the first time since she found him crying outside her apartment, she finally saw the truth. Ethan had never run away from home. Ethan had been trying to run away from himself. And standing silently beyond the auditorium doors, Gabriel realized with horror that his son had been suffering alone for months without him ever noticing. Charlotte stayed with Ethan until the last of his tears faded. The auditorium lights cast long shadows across the empty rows of seats. Outside, rain had begun tapping softly against the high windows. Ethan looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had been carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. "You do not have to solve this tonight," Charlotte told him gently. "Some hurts take time." Ethan nodded, but uncertainty remained in his eyes. Children often wanted immediate answers, immediate relief. Unfortunately, grief rarely worked that way. Eventually, they stood and began walking toward the exit. The school hallways were nearly empty now. Lockers reflected pale fluorescent light. Their footsteps echoed softly through the building. Ethan walked beside Charlotte in silence. For the first time since she met him, however, the silence felt different, not guarded, not fearful, just tired. When they reached the front entrance, a black SUV waited beneath the glow of a street lamp. Rain shimmered across the pavement. Gabriel stood beside the vehicle with his hands in his coat pockets. His expression remained composed, controlled. Yet, Charlotte immediately noticed something had changed. His eyes looked different. He looked like a man who had just learned something painful. Ethan noticed it too. Father and son stopped several feet apart. Neither spoke immediately. Charlotte sensed this moment belonged to them. "I will see you soon," she told Ethan softly. He nodded. "Promise?" The question caught her off guard. "Promise." A small smile appeared on his face. Then he climbed into the vehicle. The door closed. Rain continued falling. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Gabriel glanced toward the dark windows of the school. "Thank you." His voice sounded quieter than usual, "for listening when I did not." Charlotte understood immediately. He had heard everything. He needed someone to hear him, she replied. Gabriel looked away toward the rain. "I should have known." The statement carried no anger, only regret. Charlotte carefully chose her words. Sometimes people hide pain because they think they are protecting the people they love. Gabriel gave a slow nod. "That sounds familiar." The answer lingered between them longer than expected. Then the vehicle carrying Ethan pulled away from the curb. Red taillights disappeared into the rainy darkness. Charlotte watched them go. She did not realize Gabriel was watching her, noticing the concern on her face. The following afternoon, Charlotte found herself thinking about Ethan during every free moment. The guilt he carried felt too large, too deeply rooted. She knew reassurance alone would not fix it. Something had created that belief. Something had convinced a 7-year-old child that he was responsible for a tragedy no child could control. Late that evening, she received an unexpected message from Gabriel. It contained only one sentence: "Would you be willing to help me understand what I missed?" The message sat on her phone screen for several minutes before she answered. The next day, Charlotte arrived at the estate shortly after sunset. The mansion felt quieter than ever. Rain clouds covered the sky. Wind rattled branches outside tall windows. Ethan was already asleep. Margaret explained that he had fallen asleep early for the first time in weeks. Charlotte followed Gabriel into the library. Firelight flickered across shelves lined with books. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Gabriel stood near the fireplace holding a small wooden box. He set it carefully on the table between them. "These belong to my wife," he said. Charlotte opened the box. Inside were photographs, letters, small keepsakes, and several music box cylinders wrapped in tissue paper. Charlotte immediately recognized the melody connection. "Ethan remembers the music," she said quietly. Gabriel nodded. "She collected them for years." He stared into the fire. "After she died, I put everything away because I thought it would hurt him less." Charlotte looked down at the contents of the box. Maybe the silence hurt more. Gabriel closed his eyes briefly. The observation struck deeper than she intended. For several moments neither spoke. Then Charlotte noticed something tucked beneath a stack of old photographs, a digital voice recorder, small, silver, worn from use. Gabriel had not followed her in months. Charlotte picked it up carefully. A label on the back contained a handwritten date from years earlier. Gabriel frowned. "My wife used it constantly. Notes, ideas, reminders." Charlotte turned the device over in her hands. Something about it felt important. She could not explain why, only that a strange sense of anticipation settled over her, like standing near the edge of a puzzle she could almost solve. Neither of them knew it yet. But hidden inside that recorder was the first piece of evidence capable of changing everything Ethan believed about himself. The recorder stayed on Charlotte's mind long after she returned home that night. Rain slid down her apartment windows in thin silver lines. Traffic moved through the city below like distant rivers of light. Yet all she could think about was Ethan, about the impossible burden he had been carrying, about the question that refused to leave her mind. What had convinced him that he was responsible for something no child could control? The answer felt close now, closer than ever. 2 days later, Charlotte returned to the estate. The sky was clear for the first time in nearly a week. Pale afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the library. Gabriel sat behind a large desk reviewing documents when she entered. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent too many nights replaying old memories. The recorder rested on the desk between them. "I had someone recover the files," Gabriel said quietly. Charlotte sat down across from him. "Were there many?" Gabriel nodded. "Years of recordings." He glanced toward the device. "Most are reminders, grocery lists, ideas, messages she recorded for herself." Charlotte studied the recorder. "And the rest?" Gabriel hesitated. "I have not listened to all of them." The answer surprised her. "Why not?" He looked away toward the window. Sunlight reflected across the glass. "Because some things are difficult to revisit." Charlotte understood. Grief had a way of turning ordinary memories into impossible mountains. Gabriel reached forward and pressed a button. A woman's voice filled the room, warm, bright, alive. Charlotte immediately recognized her from the photographs. Ethan's mother. The recording lasted only a few seconds. A reminder about picking up groceries. Then another clip played. A note about Ethan's school project. Then another and another. Small moments, ordinary moments, yet each recording carried something powerful. Love, simple and unmistakable. Charlotte watched Gabriel carefully. His expression remained composed, but his eyes never left the recorder. Then one particular file began playing. The date attached to it caught Gabriel's attention immediately. It was recorded only days before her death. The room grew quiet. Her voice filled the space once again. Ethan was upset today. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken slightly. Gabriel straightened in his chair. "He told me he wished I would stop worrying so much." A long pause followed, then laughter, gentle laughter, "which probably means I am doing my job as a mother." Charlotte froze. Gabriel's eyes widened. The recording continued. "He is growing up faster than I want him to, but he is a good boy, the best boy. One day I hope he understands that nothing he could ever say would make me love him less." Silence filled the library when the recording ended. Neither moved, neither spoke. Charlotte felt emotion rise in her chest, because she understood immediately what Ethan had never heard. He knew the argument, he remembered the guilt, but he never heard the part that came after. Gabriel stared at the recorder. For several seconds, he seemed unable to speak. When he finally did, his voice was rough. He never heard this. Charlotte shook her head slowly. "No." Gabriel closed his eyes. The realization hit him like a wave. For months, maybe longer, Ethan had been building an entire belief around a memory he only partially understood. A child filling in missing pieces with guilt. I should have found this sooner, Gabriel whispered. Charlotte looked at him. You could not have known. I am his father. The words carried quiet pain. I should have known. Charlotte wanted to disagree. Instead, she understood something else. Gabriel's guilt was not so different from Ethan's. Both believed they had failed someone they loved. Both had been carrying private blame. The silence stretched between them. Then Gabriel looked toward the family photograph resting on a nearby shelf. The same photograph Charlotte had noticed during her first visit. She would know what to do, he said quietly. Charlotte followed his gaze. Maybe. Gabriel looked back at the recorder, and maybe she already did. For the first time since Charlotte met him, something softened in his expression. Not relief, not yet, but hope. Real hope, the kind that appears when darkness finally cracks enough to let light through. Unfortunately, the mystery was not completely solved, because as Charlotte prepared to leave the library, she noticed something attached to the recorder's recovered files. One final audio clip, unlabeled, undated, and neither of them had listened to it yet. The unlabeled recording sat between them like a sealed letter from the past. Evening shadows stretched across the library. The fire had burned lower now, casting soft amber light against the shelves. Neither Charlotte nor Gabriel spoke immediately. Both understood that whatever remained inside that final file might answer questions that had haunted Ethan for months. Gabriel slowly reached toward the recorder. His hand paused for a brief moment before pressing play. Static crackled softly through the speaker. Then a familiar voice emerged, Ethan's mother. The room instantly felt smaller, more fragile. Unlike the previous recordings, this one sounded unplanned. Her breathing was slightly uneven. There was movement in the background, a door closing, footsteps, everyday sounds. I probably should not be recording this, but if I do not say it somewhere, I will forget. A gentle laugh followed. Charlotte exchanged a glance with Gabriel. The recording continued. Ethan and I argued again today. Gabriel lowered his eyes. He is growing up. He wants independence. He wants space. That is normal. Another pause. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I worry about him constantly, and sometimes I think my worrying makes things harder. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. The recording went on. Gabriel keeps telling me that I cannot protect Ethan from every disappointment. He is probably right. A faint smile appeared on Gabriel's face despite everything. If anything ever happens to me, I hope Ethan knows something. Her voice softened, warm, certain nothing in this world could ever be his fault. Not my mistakes. Not my choices. Not the things life decides to do. Children are not responsible for carrying the weight of adults. Silence filled the room. Charlotte felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. Gabriel closed them completely, yet the recording was not finished. One day he will probably blame himself for something because he has my heart. A quiet laugh escaped her. He loves deeply, that is who he is. Papers shifted somewhere in the background. Then came her final words. If he ever hears this, tell him I loved being his mother. Every recording ended. The silence afterwards seemed enormous. Neither moved, neither spoke. The truth had finally surfaced, not through investigation, not through evidence. Through love preserved in a forgotten recording, Charlotte looked toward Gabriel. For several seconds he simply stared at the recorder. Then he exhaled slowly, like a man setting down a burden he had carried far too long. He needs to hear this. His voice was barely above a whisper. Charlotte nodded, yes. For the first time since they began unraveling the mystery, certainty existed between them. They finally had the words Ethan needed. Unfortunately, healing was never as simple as finding the answer. The next afternoon, Charlotte arrived at the estate expecting to see Ethan. Instead, she found tension, quiet tension, the kind that settled over a house before a storm. Staff moved through the halls, speaking softly. Margaret met Charlotte near the front entrance. Concern filled her expression. He is not in his room. What do you mean? Margaret looked toward the staircase. He left after school. A cold feeling settled in Charlotte's stomach. Moments later, she found Gabriel standing in his office. His jacket was already on, car keys in hand. The calm composure she had always associated with him had cracked. Not dramatically, but enough when, Charlotte asked. An hour ago. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Security cameras show him leaving through the west gate. Charlotte immediately understood. Ethan had heard enough pieces of the truth to become overwhelmed. Hope and fear often arrive together. Do you know where he went? Gabriel shook his head. Then something occurred to him. He opened a drawer and removed a folded map. Several locations had been marked in blue ink, places Ethan had visited with his mother, parks, museums, walking trails. Charlotte's eyes stopped on one location near the waterfront, the same place Ethan had once described while talking about her. A place his mother used to take him whenever he felt sad. Gabriel followed her gaze. Neither needed to say it aloud. Less than a minute later, they were heading toward the city. As dusk settled over New York, headlights stretched across wet streets and reflections shimmered beneath street lamps. Somewhere ahead, a little boy was carrying the same impossible guilt he had always carried. The difference was that now the people who loved him finally knew how to help. The only question remaining was whether they could reach him in time to make him believe it. The waterfront looked different at dusk. The city skyline glowed across the river in shades of silver and gold. Streetlights reflected on the dark water like scattered stars. A cold breeze moved across the empty boardwalk, carrying the distant sound of boat horns and traffic. Charlotte stepped out of the vehicle and immediately spotted him. Ethan sat alone at the far end of a wooden pier, his small figure silhouetted against the fading sky. Relief washed through her so quickly she almost missed the expression on Gabriel's face. For a brief moment, the powerful man standing beside her looked like nothing more than a frightened father. Neither spoke as they walked toward the pier. Their footsteps echoed softly against the weathered boards. Ethan heard them approaching. He turned once, then quickly looked away again. Charlotte noticed the redness around his eyes. He had been crying. The wind tugged at his jacket as he stared back toward the water. Gabriel stopped several feet away. He did not rush forward. He did not demand answers. For the first time, he seemed to understand that this moment required something different. Silence settled between them. The river moved gently below. Lights flickered across distant buildings. Finally, Gabriel spoke. "Your grandmother used to bring me here when I was your age." Ethan did not look at him. "Why?" Gabriel stared across the water. "Because I thought I had ruined everything." Ethan's shoulders shifted slightly. Charlotte remained quiet beside them. "What happened?" Gabriel smiled faintly. "I broke something important." The answer seemed almost too simple. Ethan frowned. "That is not the same." "No," Gabriel agreed. "It is not." The wind carried his next away for a moment. Then he continued. "But I remember what it felt like to believe one mistake defined who I was." Ethan finally looked toward him. Pain still lingered in his eyes. "You do not understand." Gabriel took a slow breath. The same words Charlotte had once spoken. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I heard what people said." His voice trembled. "They said everything happened because she was distracted." Gabriel closed his eyes briefly. The sentence clearly hurt him too. "And you decided that meant it was because of your argument." Tears gathered again. "She left after I said those things." The words cracked apart. "I was mean to her." Gabriel stepped closer, not enough to overwhelm him, just enough to be heard. "Ethan." His voice remained calm, steady. "Your mother told me something once." Ethan looked up. Gabriel reached into his coat and carefully removed the recorder. The small silver device reflected the glow of nearby streetlights. Ethan immediately recognized it. "What is that?" he whispered. Gabriel looked at Charlotte. She nodded softly. Then he pressed play. The recording filled the cool evening air. His wife's voice emerged once more, warm, familiar, alive. Ethan froze instantly. Every muscle in his body seemed to lock in place. He listened as his mother spoke about his growing independence, about her constant worrying, about her love for him. Then came the words he had never heard before. The words that changed everything. "Nothing in this world could ever be his fault. Not my mistakes. Not my choices. Not the things life decides to do. Children are not responsible for carrying the weight of adults." Ethan stared at the recorder. Tears slipped silently down his face. The recording continued. "If he ever hears this, tell him I loved being his mother." Then silence returned. Only the sound of water remained. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ethan's breathing became uneven. His shoulders trembled. Charlotte felt tears sting her own eyes, because she could see the moment happening. The exact moment a burden began to crack apart. Not disappear. Healing never worked that quickly, but crack. Finally. Ethan looked at Gabriel. She really said nodded. His own eyes glistened beneath the pier lights. Every word. Ethan's face crumpled. Years of grief and guilt poured out all at once. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. Gabriel immediately wrapped his arms around him. Neither spoke. They simply stood there together beneath the darkening sky. Father and son, grieving the same woman, carrying the same loss, finally sharing it. Charlotte quietly turned away, giving them privacy. She looked across the river toward the city lights. Behind her, she heard Ethan's voice, small, broken, hopeful. "Do you think she knew I was sorry?" The answer came without hesitation. I know she did. And for the first time since Charlotte found a lonely little boy crying outside her apartment, Ethan allowed himself to believe it. The days that followed felt different, not perfect. Healing rarely arrived all at once, but something had shifted. The heaviness that had followed Ethan for months no longer seemed impossible to carry. The guilt was still there in small moments, in quiet moments, yet now it existed beside something else, hope. For the first time since his mother's death, he was no longer carrying the burden alone. Autumn continued settling over New York. Crisp air filled the mornings. Leaves gathered along sidewalks and beneath park benches. Life moved forward one ordinary day at a time. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Charlotte arrived at the estate to find unexpected activity. Staff moved through the house carrying boxes of flowers. Tables were being arranged in the garden. White chairs lined a stone pathway leading toward a small memorial space near the edge of the property. Curious, Charlotte found Margaret overseeing the preparations. "What is happening?" she asked. Margaret smiled warmly. Today would have been her birthday. Charlotte immediately understood. The memorial garden sat beneath a canopy of golden trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. White roses lined the pathway. The atmosphere felt peaceful rather than sad, a celebration of memory instead of loss. Ethan stood near the center of the garden, holding a small bouquet. But not frightened, Charlotte noticed the difference immediately. When he saw her approaching, his face brightened. "You came." "Of course I came." Ethan smiled. The simple expression felt like a gift. Later that afternoon, family friends gathered quietly beneath the autumn sky. Stories were shared, memories were exchanged, laughter appeared where sorrow once lived. Charlotte listened as people described Ethan's mother. Her kindness, her stubbornness, her love of music boxes. Every story painted the same picture. A woman who loved deeply, a woman who would have hated knowing her son blamed himself. As the gathering slowly ended, Ethan walked toward a small stone bench near the center of the garden. A photograph of his mother rested beside fresh flowers. He stood there silently for several moments. Charlotte remained nearby but did not interrupt. Eventually, Gabriel joined him. Father and son stood together beneath the golden leaves. The breeze moved softly through the branches overhead. "I miss her too," Gabriel said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I know." The answer surprised Charlotte, not because of what he said, because of how he said it. Without anger, without guilt, just truth. Gabriel rested a hand on his shoulder. "I spent a long time pretending I was fine because I thought it would make things easier for you." Ethan looked up at him. "Did it?" Gabriel smiled sadly. "Not even a little." A small laugh escaped Ethan, then another. The sound carried across the garden. Charlotte felt emotion rise in her chest, because it was the first genuine laugh she had heard from him, the first one completely free of sadness. Hours later, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and lavender, the guests departed. The estate grew quiet once again. Charlotte prepared to leave as well. She stood near the front entrance, gathering her coat when Gabriel approached. Evening light filtered through the windows behind him. For a moment he handed her a small wrapped box. Charlotte looked surprised. "What is this? Open it." Carefully, she unwrapped the package. Inside sat a silver music box. Not identical to the one in her apartment. Similar, elegant, beautiful. "Gabriel," he shook his head gently. "It belonged to my wife." Charlotte immediately started to protest. "I cannot accept this." "Yes, you can." His voice remained calm. "Because she would have wanted it to go to someone who helped her son." The sincerity in his expression left little room for argument. Charlotte carefully held the music box. Emotion tightened her throat. "Thank you." Gabriel nodded. For several seconds they simply stood there, the evening quiet around them. Then Ethan appeared from the hallway carrying a folded piece of paper. "I made something." He handed it to Charlotte. She unfolded it slowly. Inside was a drawing. 3 figures standing together beneath a bright sky. One was clearly Ethan, one was clearly Gabriel. The third looked unmistakably like Charlotte. There was no broken circle this time, no dark shading, no hidden sadness. Just 3 people standing together, looking forward. And for the first time since she met the lonely little boy outside her apartment, Charlotte realized she no longer felt like a visitor in their lives. Winter arrived quietly. 2 months passed before Charlotte fully realized how much her life had changed. The city looked different beneath pale December skies. Store windows glowed with holiday lights. Cold air drifted through crowded streets. People hurried along sidewalks carrying gifts and coffee cups and plans for the future. Yet the biggest change had nothing to do with the season. It was the simple fact that Ethan smiled more now. The transformation was not dramatic. It happened gradually. One ordinary day less frequent. The sadness no longer followed him into every room. The drawings changed too. The broken circles disappeared. The dark shading faded. Hope slowly replaced grief. On the final Friday before Christmas, Charlotte finished work later than expected. Snow flurries drifted through the air outside her clinic. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. Exhaustion settled into her shoulders as she stepped out of the elevator and walked down the familiar hallway toward apartment 4C. The building looked exactly as it always had. The same beige walls, the same flickering light near the corner, the same quiet hum from distant heating vents. Charlotte smiled as she reached her door because the hallway no longer reminded her of loneliness. It reminded her of beginnings. She reached for her keys. Then she heard laughter, familiar laughter, a child's laughter. Charlotte turned. Ethan stood at the far end of the hallway wearing a winter coat that looked slightly too large. Snowflakes melted in his dark hair. Beside him stood Gabriel. One hand rested casually in his coat pocket. The other held a small bakery box. For a moment Charlotte simply stared. The memory arrived instantly. The crying little boy, the tears, the uncertainty, the loneliness. All of it had started right here. Ethan ran toward her, not because he was scared, not because he needed help, simply because he was happy to see her. Charlotte laughed as he wrapped his arms around her. "You are supposed to be at the estate," she said. Ethan grinned. "I convinced him to make a surprise visit." Charlotte looked toward Gabriel. "Did you?" Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "I lost that argument approximately 30 minutes ago." The three of them stood together beneath the warm hallway light. Snow drifted past the windows at the end of the corridor. The world outside felt distant, peaceful. Ethan handed Charlotte an envelope. "Open it." She carefully unfolded the card inside. It contained another drawing, this one more detailed than any of the others. 3 figures walking together down a hallway, a boy in the middle, a man on one side, a woman on the other. Above them, Ethan had written a single sentence: "Families do not have to start at the beginning." Charlotte felt emotion tighten her throat. She looked down at him. "This is beautiful." Ethan smiled proudly. Then he glanced toward Gabriel. "I told you she would like it." Gabriel nodded. "You were right." The answer carried more warmth than Charlotte had ever heard from him before. Time had changed him too. The constant tension that once lived behind his eyes had softened. He still carried responsibility, still carried loss. But he no longer carried it alone, neither did Ethan, neither did Charlotte. The hallway fell quiet for a moment, comfortable quiet, the kind that exists between people who no longer need to prove anything. Then Gabriel handed Charlotte the bakery box. Inside sat 3 cupcakes, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla, 1 red velvet. Charlotte laughed. "Only 3? Gabriel looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back innocently. "I counted." Snow continued falling outside. Somewhere downstairs a door opened and closed. Life moved forward. Simple, ordinary, beautiful. Charlotte unlocked her apartment. Ethan immediately stepped inside. Gabriel followed a second later. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just familiarity. The same hallway where a lonely child had once sat crying now echoed with laughter instead. The same door that had opened to a stranger now opened to family. And as the evening light warmed the apartment and snow covered the city beyond the windows, one truth remained. Sometimes the people who change your life do not arrive with answers. Sometimes they arrive carrying pain. Sometimes they arrive carrying loss. And sometimes, if they are lucky, they leave carrying hope. The hallway light flickered once more behind them before the door gently closed, and this time no one was left alone outside it.